There comes a point when a statement stops being a simple personal opinion and becomes a signal, not because it's uttered in a sensational way, but because it touches a raw nerve that many avoid mentioning. This is what the interview given on January 8th to pelicanplus.com represents. Not a polemical intervention, but a diagnosis that, by its nature, forces us to question the direction taken by ecclesiastical teaching. The speaker is Marian Eleganti, Auxiliary Bishop Emeritus, who on that occasion formulated a clear judgment on the current situation of the Church. His words are not marginal to the debate, nor can they be dismissed as an isolated outburst. They directly address a central theme, the coherence of the magisterium. And it is precisely this centrality that makes the interview relevant, because it does not concern individual pastoral choices, but the very principle of doctrinal continuity. According to what was stated in the interview, the problem is not a temporary difficulty or a physiological divergence of interpretation. It is explicitly stated that we would be faced with a situation that has never occurred before, in which dicasteries and magisterium show signs of internal inconsistency. The biggest problem, he says, is that we have never had a situation like this in which the dicastery or the magisterium of the Church have become incoherent and inconsistent. Not a generic criticism, but an observation that strikes at the very heart of doctrinal authority and its guiding role. The point, it is explained, is not the presence of debates or differing sensibilities, which have never been lacking in the history of the Church. What is worrying is the lack of a clear and recognizable line capable of ensuring continuity with tradition. When teaching appears vague, when it requires constant clarification to avoid misunderstanding, a space of uncertainty inevitably opens up that impacts the faithful, the pastors, and the very credibility of the institution. In this context, a specific request is made. Some recent documents should be corrected and given a true interpretation in the sense of traditional doctrine, so that they remain consistent with the perennial teaching of the Church. The word correction is not used in a vague or polemical way, but as a concrete necessity to re-establish a lost balance. It is not a question of rewriting the doctrine, but of preventing it from being obscured by ambiguous formulations or by openings perceived as inconsistent. Among the texts cited, Fiducia Supplicans occupies a central place. The document is cited as a prime example of this crisis of coherence. The interview notes how significant resistance has emerged around it. Not an instinctive rebellion, but an articulated dissent, based on theological arguments defined as good. This passage is particularly relevant because it shifts the debate from an emotional to a doctrinal level, underlining that the objections do not arise from a rejection of authority, but from a concern for fidelity to the teaching received. It is claimed that the document is not well-founded, and that it has precisely for this reason generated widespread critical reactions. The criticism does not only concern the pastoral consequences, but the theological structure of the text, which is considered insufficient to support the implications that derive from it. In other words, it denounces a disconnect between what the Church has always taught and the way in which certain openings are formulated today. In this regard, an element considered revealing is highlighted: the subsequent intervention of Cardinal Fernandez, interpreted as an attempt to scale down the initial document. According to the proposed analysis, This second clarification would only indirectly confirm the weaknesses of the original text. If it becomes necessary to tone it down, explain it, or correct it, it means something hasn't worked right from the start. It is in this dynamic that one of the most evident signs of the denounced inconsistency is identified: a magisterium that seems to proceed by successive adjustments rather than by clear and stable affirmations. Alongside fiducia supplicans, mater populi fidelis is also mentioned. Here too, the devotional content itself is not disputed, but rather the need for an authentic reading in accordance with traditional doctrine. Without such an interpretation, it is argued even apparently less controversial texts can contribute to a perception of doctrinal discontinuity and ambiguity. The risk, according to this reading, is that the accumulation of small scraps will produce a wider fracture over time. During the interview, a basic conviction clearly emerges. The magisterium cannot afford to produce documents that require constant clarification to be properly understood. When this happens, the risk is not only confusion among the faithful, but a loss of confidence in the very authority that should guard and transmit the truth. Clarity from this perspective is not optional, but an intrinsic responsibility of the magisterial task. The discussion then shifts to another sensitive area, that of the relationship with the crescent moon religion. Here too, the words spoken are direct and unmitigated. "I am not so naive as to think that water and fire can coexist," he says, using a clear image to describe an incompatibility believed to be structural. This religion is described as having, since its origins, embodied an intolerant and anti-Christian attitude and driven by a desire for global domination. These are strong statements which consciously go against a certain sugar-coated narrative of interreligious dialogue. However, they are not presented as political provocations but as historical and theological judgments rooted in a realistic reading of the relationship between the two religions. Here again, the point is not a rejection of dialogue as such, but a criticism of an approach considered naive, incapable of recognizing profound differences and real conflicts. According to this vision, authentic dialogue cannot be based on the denial of incompatibilities, but on the truth of positions. Therefore, we are not asking for a change in doctrine, but the opposite. That doctrine be once again assumed as the binding criterion for every magisterial expression, without ambiguity and without compromise. The tone is not that of someone outside the church, but of someone speaking from within, calling for responsibility. If this outreach is useful to you and you'd like to support it concretely, you can also do so with a super thank you. It's a simple gesture, but crucial to continuing this work freely and independently. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.